Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars video. This is going to be my review for The Bad Batch episode 8, which is called Reunion. And overall, this was a really good episode. Some impactful, big things happened here. We knew it was going to be like that because of the setup from the end of the last episode. The Empire was coming to Braca, and we're going to catch them sort of unawares. And that's exactly what we got here. So lots of action. We did get the return of Crosshairs, which is what the episode title is referring to. So that was kind of impactful to see after quite a few episodes of not having Crosshairs. Him return, him leading sort of the Empire's forces here against the Bad Batch. But also the return to sort of the Kaminoan plot of they know things are kind of going wrong and that they're building up for their... It's kind of a weird plot in that, again, there's been so much separation you almost forget what was said. But, their plan is to get the Bad Batch, primarily Omega, and sort of use her to focus their clone production on augmented clones like the Bad Batch and sort of supply them more to the Empire to hopefully continue their deal with the Empire. Obviously, it's this case of with the Kaminoans where the Empire are basically on the verge of kind of turning on you. This is not maybe the best move, and now they're, as we find out, they were the ones hiring bounty hunters. Does it necessarily fully confirm that they hired Fennec Shan? I guess it does, even though it wasn't super direct. But just the fact that the Prime Minister was we need to hire more, basically. And then who turns up at the end of the episode? Cad Bane, known bounty hunter. Arguably, I suppose at this point, in this era, probably the best bounty hunter in the galaxy, I guess. So that was cool. But I like that they returned to that plot. They sort of, in a way, answered a few questions, brought a lot of the major plot points back into play, and that okay, here's a disagreement between the Empire and the Kaminoans, and that Rampart was just yeah, if you find the Bad Batch, kill them, but we know that the Prime Minister and so on, they want the Bad Batch alive, because they need to sort of study them as augmented clones to, have some kind of leverage, I suppose, to work with in terms of their negotiations, I guess, with the Empire. So whenever we return to that, it's going to be really interesting because I get the impression, yeah, I can definitely see the Kaminoans getting wiped out. I think they're going to make a big move eventually within this series to really have Kamino just kind of taken out of things completely. Again, there's a few moving pieces in the sense that okay, the Kaminoans are the cloners. And obviously that cloning technology still continues into even the sequel trilogy. So I guess what happens roughly is I guess the Empire just takes over Kamino in some way. So that's going to be interesting to see that happen. But I think we're quite a bit of ways from that. With the Bad Batch though, we do get a section at the start of the episode before the Empire arrives. And it's just a Wrecker training Omega on how to sort of defuse an explosive, and Wrecker makes her think it's a live explosive, but it ends up just being sort of a smoke bomb. So that was a kind of fun little moment. But very quickly they find out that the Empire is here. They're taken completely by surprise, so there's no real room to escape here. They just have to prepare for the onslaught here. So, you get this idea of they know the tactics of the regular clones, but then Crosshairs, I suppose, knows the more kind of oddball tactics of the Bad Batch. And so they sort of kind of cancel each other out here, and they end up in these kind of pretty, even confrontations here. The first one is basically they all get captured, and the out is that they reactivate one of the cannons, fire it. And because obviously it's a damaged ship that is in a shipyard, it basically destroys the whole structure of that area of the ship, and it falls on top of people, and that allows them to escape. So I think they did a really good job in the action sequences here of getting across the absolute desperation of these plans, that they're so last minute, so risky that they're putting themselves at risk just to get out of an even riskier situation. That I thought worked really well. In previous episodes, I think a lot of the action has been rather samey. In terms of, like, especially say the Martez sisters episode, that was just a very generic gunfight between, the clones, the Martez sisters, against just random police droids. Basically, it was not really needed to be such a focus of the episode. Here, though, the action was actually like really, really good in terms of, like, they used the environment very effectively. A ship that's sort of falling apart but is still like roughly active. Very nicely used here with, like, the cannons there. And then the big set piece towards the end is that, like, okay, we can't get to the ship, so let's escape the cruiser by going out through the engine bay. And, like, they talk about, like, the ion engines and so on. But Crosshair's, like, last minute manages to realize this is what they're doing, and so they basically, from like a sniper's position, have them pinned down in the engines. If they come out, they're going to get sniped and killed straight away because they're in such an awkward situation. There's no real cover once they get out of the engines. But the other thing is that Crosshair has basically told someone else, activate the engines. So if they stay there, they die. If they don't, if they try and leave, they die. How do they get out of this situation? Now, this is where the bit earlier on in the episode comes into play, in that they were scavenging the Jedi cruiser for kind of weapons, information, parts that they were going to give to Sid to kind of pay off their debt that they have with her. So Wrecker was actually carrying around quite a few weapons and explosives with him, and they used them. So they basically realized that, okay, we can't blow up the engine. There's not enough here to just take the engine out. But what we can do is basically plant explosives all around the kind of rim of the sort of like engine sort of cowling type thing, and basically blow that bit off with us in it, so that the engine is still firing, but they fall off with this chunk, and that gets them kind of out of the way. Again, highly risky plan that they're having to, like, last minute, in like literally 2 minutes, lay charges all around the area that they're in, including super high up. Have them explode with them more or less right next to it. It's a giant part, but they're still like right there next to the explosives. And then hope to survive in rubble falling into more rubble. It's just like the violence as the thing fell off was pretty crazy, as you see the group get separated, completely tossed around, and then very interestingly, as the sort of cowling falls off, the engine is still going. The engine fire basically hits Crosshairs, and he gets kind of burned. Now, initially when you see this, it kind of looks like, okay, he just took a burn. But then later on, when they sort of are patching him up, they really get across that, like, he was injured properly by this. So I don't know how far necessarily, I suppose, we're meant to read into the idea of, like, is this just sort of a lot of superficial kind of injuries, that he just has some burns? Or is he, like, actually, like, did he get pretty wrecked here? Is he going to have, like, augmentation, cybernetic parts, that sort of thing? Because I think the prediction that a lot of people are having is that Crosshairs might become, like, the first Death Trooper or something like that, which have sort of augmentations or something. I'm not really sure. I think they could go either way. I think one reason they're doing this for sure is that I think they want you to when they eventually get around to maybe doing something with Crosshairs and getting him back on side, however that comes around, however it happens, that if he does get back onto the side of the Bad Batch by having his inhibitor chip removed, that he has sort of visual reminders on himself of what he did working for the Empire, and that will add to his character. It's either that, or they're going very tragic with the character, and he is going to basically, in a way, become more machine than man, and we're just, with the clone dynamic, get across this idea of the Empire morphing this character who could have been a member of our group into this sort of like monstrous, Death Trooper type thing with all this augmentation, the very much the dark side kind of modification kind of path. And it's just, he just has this very tragic arc over the course of the series, and maybe right as he dies, he switches around a little bit, and it's just a very tragic moment. I think they're the two paths that they could go on with Crosshairs, but I just thought the fact that they went as far as to sort of have him get injured, and seemingly quite heavily, was an interesting path. But yeah, that leads us, of course, to pretty much the end sequence, which is like Crosshairs is just then like, make sure the ship is guarded so that they can't get off, and they can't communicate with the officers that are meant to be there guarding the ship. And we cut to them, and they're all dead, right as Hunter and Omega arrive there at the ship, because they were separated from everyone else in the fall. So we get the reveal who took out all of these clones. And so they give you just a few seconds to kind of consider, okay, new character reveal here, who is it? And you're thinking, okay, it could be the return of Fennec Shand, who's caught up with them. Perhaps, but given what they said earlier on about another bounty hunter, perhaps not as likely. I was immediately thinking, might they do Boba Fett? That would be quite interesting to have him return in this way, but I wasn't really sure about it. But yeah, I suppose ultimately Boba was the one I was kind of more leaning towards, but it ends up being Cad Bane, who, like, right as he was revealed, I was kind of thinking, like, okay, bounty hunter, who else could it be? Like, I guess Cad Bane, but I'd always thought that, like, it was sort of kind of canon that the unfinished Clone Wars arc where Boba, I think, kills Cad Bane was kind of still a thing. Again, it's this weird thing of, like, that was planned episodes of the show where they showed some animatics from it, including the scene where Boba apparently kills Cad Bane. So I was kind of thinking, like, okay, are they just going with the idea that that still happens, but we never got the episode? But no, here we have Cad Bane here and now. So they're clearly changing the path of some of these characters here with regards to, like, the unfinished Clone Wars episodes. And it ultimately, I think, made sense. Cad Bane is the best bounty hunter in the galaxy at this point. We have to wait a few years before Boba takes that sort of crown, I suppose, because, again, the thing with Boba is that he's like 13 at this point. Because he was like, I think he was 10 in Attack of the Clones, and we're still like just after Order 66 here, so only like three or so years have passed. He's only 13, 14. And while I suppose that's still potential, if he's that good, that he could kill Cad Bane, it perhaps maybe wouldn't be as meaningful as if he did it when he's a little bit older. That's, I think, more of what they're going for here. Now, I do still think that they will want to introduce Boba Fett at some point, and maybe later on in the Bad Batch, we might get that same confrontation of Boba being the one to actually take down Cad Bane in the end. Because, interestingly, what they did here was that I wouldn't say it was exactly shot for shot, but it was a similar type of scene of they had Hunter have a kind of gunslinger showdown with Cad Bane. Because, of course, Cad Bane has the whole Western style going on. And Cad Bane wins. He shoots Hunter in the chest. Now, the way they go with this is just that, I guess, he took a shot directly to the chest. His armor absorbed it, I guess, but he still takes the sort of, like, physical impact of a heavy blaster shot. And that's what Hunter's going to have to recover from. I guess they'll explain in the next episode if he actually has, like, a proper injury here, if he needs to recover, but he was able to walk onto the ship and escape at the end, and then be conscious enough to actually talk and say that they need to get Omega back from the bounty hunter. So there's that. But still, very cool reveal here. I think Cad Bane is a very, like, strong, interesting character. He's really cool, and Dave Filoni has the connections to all of this, of course, and it makes sense. And it's interesting because, of course, through this it means, like, okay, this is, I guess, the other bounty hunter the Kaminoans hired, and it makes sense. Is Fennec Shand going to show up again? Are we going to get, like, a little bit of a kind of fight between bounty hunters over who gets to, get the reward, I suppose, in the end by actually turning Omega over to the Kaminoans? Might Boba show up at some point? Probably, it's a kind of interesting one. But where we are right now, how far off is something like that, I'm not sure. Might they instead change it so that actually it's the Bad Batch are the ones who get to take Cad Bane out after what happened here, of course, in the same way that any character who sort of tries to steal or take away Baby Yoda, the fandom hates, is Cad Bane going to be viewed in that way now because he's taken Omega? Perhaps, but we have to obviously wait and see. So the big question, obviously, is where are we going from here? We've separated Omega from the Bad Batch for the first time since the very beginning, of course. What do we do here? So I guess we're going to get some scenes with Cad Bane, just with regards to like reintroducing him. But are we going to have an encounter with Cad Bane before we get back to Kamino, or is he just going to straight up succeed? He delivers Omega back to Kamino, and then if that happens, it's actually going to be a quite interesting plot because the Kaminoans are going to have to hide Omega because, like, I guess the Empire is on Kamino, so the high-ups in Kamino can't just go off-world to kind of have Omega somewhere else. So they kind of have to bring her secretly onto Kamino and, like, hide her somewhere, but still have her to research on. That's going to be interesting to see how that works in terms of just the kind of subterfuge going on Kamino of, like, everyone being suspicious of everyone else. It might bring the plot, bring the action back onto Kamino, in terms of if the Bad Batch have to basically infiltrate Kamino to get back. That's interesting. And then Crosshairs, I guess, will get fixed up, augmented, whatever might happen with him. And we have another showdown with Crosshairs on Kamino. And Kamino also has a medical facility where, I suppose, theoretically, the chip could be removed if required, if that is the path that they want to take. The options are open there. But, yeah, I just wonder, like, with this show, which does have a habit across its earlier episodes of, okay, they could do this big thing immediately next, but instead, let's actually have this sort of, like, side plot happen. Might we get more sort of, this is a little bit of a bounty hunter arc, where Fennec Shand comes back into play and maybe reveals that she's a little bit more on the side of the Bad Batch than exactly the people who hired her. That could be quite interesting, especially because they didn't directly confirm that Fennec Shand was, the one who they hired. I guess it roughly is. I don't really know what way to interpret that. Am I overcomplicating it, or am I oversimplifying it by actually assuming that that's the case? Might there be a third bounty hunter, a Boba Fett, in play? Who knows? And then, like I said, Boba is obviously an option just because I'm assuming they're probably not going to want to stray too far from that Clone Wars arc that they did have planned, where it was meant to be this big monumental moment where Boba defeats Cad Bane. Because if you look at that scene, it's out there on the internet. What happens is that they have a gunslinger showdown, Boba versus Cad Bane. They both fire. Cad Bane's shot hits Boba in the helmet, and it creates the dent on Boba's helmet, the signature dent that's on Boba's helmet. So that's where he got that from. But Boba's actually able to fire off both of his blasters, and at least one of them, I guess, hits Cad Bane in the head because his big hat, kind of flies off. So I don't think the scene confirms Cad Bane is dead, but likely he is, just because of the hat flying off, And I suppose this is what signifies, Boba is now basically one of the best bounty hunters in the galaxy, so that's a big one. Now, because Fennec Shand is in play, and we know the connection between Boba and Fennec from The Mandalorian, it also leaves them room, if they do introduce Boba, to create more of an early connection between Boba and Fennec, which is going to be quite interesting in the sense of, like, if they've really known each other, like, that long. So I don't really know about that one, because then it sort of creates this weird situation of, like, it felt like it was kind of random, Boba in The Mandalorian finding Fennec and, like, repairing her, but if he knew her, it would explain why he helped her so much. They can go either way with it, I suppose. But, yeah, like I said, overall, enjoyable episode. Like, I thought, like, definitely one of the better ones. We've had, like, 2 very strong episodes in a row. And once they follow this up with some good stuff, I'm going to be pretty excited, because the Bad Batch is going to be sort of a little bit more emotional going forward. Like, they've had Omega, they've been used to having her around, now they don't have her, and there's a need to get her back. How risky are they going to be with it? Like, are they going to return to Sid and do other jobs while they figure out what to do? Or are they going to go straight beeline, try and get her back? Because this is where I suppose the plot point of, we now sort of know who hired who, that sort of thing, but they don't. They still really don't have any information about who has hired the bounty hunters to get Omega back for who, that sort of thing. So they need to figure that information out themselves, which is going to be interesting. So they're my thoughts on the episode. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are, but that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.